And we're dealing with questions. Going to start with a review of items from my standard Kumbh abhishekam talk, covered in the last two satsangs, and then go on to some new material from that talk. So last time we covered two common concerns, so this is just a review, so I won't ask you any questions. First common concern that I answered is, why do we perform abhisheka? Several non-Hindu and Hindu friends have argued it's maybe better to donate it to the poor. And our answer is, the devotees' offerings of cut fruit, cooked food, water, fragrant flowers, and milk play an important part in the inner workings of the puja. The deity does not utilize the gross physical substance being offered, but rather utilizes the life energy or prana within it as the priest presents the offering. And abundance of abhishekam offerings enables the deity's blessings to be stronger. So I'll repeat the last line there. That's the essence of the answer. And abundance of abhisheka offerings enables the deity's blessings to be stronger. We don't have to be pour milk for days, but 1 gallon versus 10 gallons. 10 gallons is better when there's a large crowd there. So basically, the temple uplifts you, and it does a better job at it when it has an abundance of offerings of fruit, cooked flowers, milk, etc. Our second common concern is, since God is omnipresent, what is the need to build large temples to worship Him? The cost of construction is quite large, plus then you have the ongoing cost of monthly maintenance that has to be met. Couldn't all that money be spent in a better way? Answer. Practically speaking, God's omnipresence is a very subtle form of consciousness, too subtle for most of us to experience, unless we are quite skilled in meditation. The easiest place to experience God is in the temple. This is because of its construction, consecration, and continuous daily worship. Most individuals can't experience God initially except at a temple. Hindus we're talking about. The temple, it's easy to experience God. And then once we experience God in the temple, we can then, based on that actual experience, not that theory, go deeper and experience God in our home shrine. And then once we've managed to do that, we can go deeper and experience God in ourself. Atma Kovil, Atma Mandir, the temple of the soul. So it has to start somewhere. If you try and start someone on finding the temple of the soul, they go within, and they don't find sacredness necessarily. We're up to our third common concern. Do Hindus worship idols? This is a good one. How would you answer that question, since it's a new one? A few years ago, I attended a Kumbh abhishekam in Fort Worth, Texas. There we are in Fort Worth. One of the priests there, Pandit Dr. Udaya Bhaskar Dikshit Parasaram, who was also a scholar, gave an excellent explanation of the sacredness of the murti. He began by explaining that Hindus do not worship idols. This, of course, is a common misunderstanding that many people have, including some Hindus. The priest went on to explain that the stone form of the deity can be called an idol or a statue before the sacred water is poured over it in the Prana Pradista ceremony. But after that takes place, it is transformed into a sacred murti, and in that murti, the deity actually resides. So that's the answer. It's an idol, and then you have the Prana Pradista ceremony, and that turns it into a murti. And then it stays a murti because of the continuous daily worship. If the continuous daily worship stops, that will dissipate and it will become an idol again. Nicely explained by him. Oh, this concept is explained in the Pancharatra text, Sattvata Samhita. So these are Vaishnava references, but they say the same thing that the Saiva references and Gurudeva do, and they add a little more material in some instances. So it's good to see that. Because they're both agamic. The Pancharatra or Vaikanasa, South Indian approach to Vaishnavism, is very similar to Saivism in terms of what's done in the temple. Philosophy is different, but not so much the temple rituals. When the perfectly designed image is systematically installed, so that's the Prana Pradista ceremony, he occupies the concerned image. Not before it's installed, but after it's installed. By his gracious presence in that image, he gives concrete and visible expressions to all of his transcendental and imperceptible qualities. Then we have an interesting source, Swami Harshananda. He's Ramakrishna Swami in Bengaluru, but he seems to be extremely knowledgeable in the Pancharatra Agama tradition, so maybe his family's involved in that. So it's called Archa. What we call murti is he's calling Archa. Archa is the form of the deity represented by an icon that is transmuted into the very form of the deity full of the 6 divine attributes through the power of the mantras used in the installation as well as subsequent worship. I could have written that myself, right? Those are the 2 points I'd made previously. Starts at the installation, but the subsequent worship is needed, otherwise it won't be maintained. Therefore, the proper installation of the Archamurti with the prescribed Agama procedures is very essential for the power of the Archamurti. Even the man-made images, though prepared out of inanimate substances, can become alive if they are duly consecrated through the prescribed rites. Also required is the proper subsequent maintenance of the sanctity through pujas, utsavas, and other regular and proper worship. Okay, could have written it myself, as I said. God, who is omnipotent, descends into such images with a subtle body. This is the Archavatara, or incarnation for purposes of ordinary worship. Then we get the Saivite Agama, Ajita Agama. Shiva Lingam Puja is for the purpose of invoking the presence of Sadashiva in the lingam. Very direct. During puja, Lord Shiva's in the lingam. So we invite him at the beginning, and then at the end we let him go. We say Avahana Najanami. So that's when he can leave. Gurudeva also taught this principle. We worship God Shiva and the gods, who by their infinite power spiritually hover over and indwell the image, or murti, which we revere as their temporary body. We commune with them through the ritual act of puja. Then we get Gurudeva's famous telephone analogy. We may liken this mystery to our ability to communicate with others through the telephone. We do not talk to the telephone. Rather, we use a telephone as a means of communication with another person who is perhaps thousands of miles away. Without the telephone, we could not converse across such distances. And without the sanctified murti in the temple or shrine, we cannot easily commune with the deity. Both are instruments of communication. The stone or metal images, the stone or metal deity images enshrined in the temple are not mere symbols of God and the gods. They are not mere inert idols, but the forms through which divine love, power, and blessings flood forth from the inner world of the gods into this physical world. As we progress in our worship, we begin to adore the image as the deity's physical body, for we know that he is actually present and conscious in it during puja, aware of our thoughts and feelings, and even sensing the pujari's gentle touch on the metal or stone. And the fourth common concern that I answered in my talk is, why are there so many gods in the temple? I have trouble relating to so many. One challenge for the younger generation of Hinduism relating meaningfully to the temple is that they find a larger number of deities the temple contains to be hard to relate to. It is common in the USA for a temple to have a shrine for each deity that a significant number of members of the local Hindu community worship. Often this takes the form of one side of the temple being the Saivite side and the other side the Vaishnavite side. Some temples include shrines for Shirdi Sai Baba and Swami Narayan. On occasion, there is even a Jain shrine for Mahavir. Two temples in the U.S. I visited recently had 25 and 27 shrines respectively. Imagine that, 27 different deities in the temple, and the young people walk in. Kind of overwhelming, huh? As I mentioned, Hindu youth and older children find this multiplicity of deities confusing and hard to relate to. They often ask me the question, why does Hinduism have so many deities? Why can't it have just one? And how would you answer that question? The answer I give talks about language. How many official languages does the United States have? The answer, of course, is one, English. I then ask, how many official languages does India have? The answer is 22. The reason for so many, of course, is again related to the country's history. India has a history that is thousands of years old versus the U.S.'s history is only a few hundred years old. In ancient times, there was less travel and communication, and regional differences naturally developed. It is natural that a country with that many languages would have a multiplicity of names and concepts for God as well, based on ancientness and very little travel. A question about worship a few years ago came from a teenage boy. Leaning forward in earnest, he asked, do I have to worship all the deities in the temple, or can I simply focus on just Lord Ganesha? I'm finding that keeping a singular focus, I'm getting much closer to him. I'm beginning to form a connection in a way that I never have had with any of the other deities. I replied in the affirmative. That is fine to focus on just one deity. In fact, this is the pattern followed by most Hindus. However, it is only fitting to honor and acknowledge all the divinities within the temple. I shared, when attending puja to another deity, you worship sincerely and show deep respect. But you need not strive to feel as close to that deity as you do to Lord Ganesha. The idea of focusing on just one deity is prevalent in many Hindu traditions. And in a temple with a large number of deities, this can be the solution to the challenge of not being able to relate to them all. Just choose one. In Sanskrit, the deity of one's most pious attention is called Ishta Devata, literally cherished or chosen deity. Vaishnavas may choose among many divine forms. Vishnu, Balaji, Krishna, Radha, Rama, Lakshmi, Hanuman, Narasimha, as well as the Shalagrama. Smartis traditionally choose their Ishta from among 6 deities: Shiva, Shakti, Vishnu, Surya, Ganesha, and Kumara, or any of their traditional forms. Shaktas, who worship the divine as the goddess Shakti, may focus on one among her many forms, from the furious Kali, the benign and graceful Parvati, or Ambika. And then we come along here. Saivites direct their worship primarily to Shiva, as represented by the Shiva Linga, Nataraja, and Ardhanarishvara. Many Saivites choose Lord Murugan, also known as Kartikeya or Skanda, as their Ishta Devata. There's Murugan. Gurudeva, Saiva, taught us to worship Shiva as the supreme god while starting with the worship of Lord Ganesha, who is the closest god to the material plane of consciousness, most easily contacted, and most able to assist us in our day-to-day life and concerns. In deepening our devotion to God, an analogy to friends is helpful. Teenagers have many friends, but it is common to have one best friend to share the personal details of life. Having an Ishtadevata is like that, and the feeling we should have toward the divinity is the same as the feeling we have for our best friend. Holding a singular focus helps us to draw closer and closer to that deity. Another approach to understanding the deity's compassionate nature, and in the process ridding yourself of any lingering fear, is to think of the god or goddess as the parent and yourself as the child. In fact, the deity is the perfect parent because no matter what we do, she always sends us blessings and love. When we make mistakes, he never becomes angry or punishes us. The deity's love is perfect love. What is perfect love? Exists at all times, in all circumstances, for all souls. In developing a closeness with the deity, we eventually discover and bask in that perfect love. Then we get Tirumandaram by Tirumular affirms this idea. The ignorant foolishly say that love and Shiva are two, but none of them knows that love alone is Shiva. When men know that love and Shiva are the same, love as Shiva, they ever remain. Or simply said, Ambe Shivam. In giving talks on the topic of love of God, I often share the similarity of the Vaishnava concepts with the Saiva concepts. In the Chaitanya school of Vaishnavism, for example, bhakti is seen as progressing through 5 stages. Neutrality toward God, servitude for God, friendship with God, parental feelings for God, and relating to God as a lover to the beloved. Saivism, there exists a parallel concept that also starts with neutrality. Next stage is called the Dasamarga, with the soul relating to God as servant to master. In the next stage, Saputra Marga, our relationship with God is as a child to his parents. Third stage, Sakamarga, God is like a friend, and in the 4th stage of maturity called Samarga, God is our dearest beloved. So if you just look at the slide, you can see the only difference is the order. Friendship and parental feelings are in reversed order in Saivism and Vaishnavism, but otherwise it's exactly the same. So what's that tell us? It tells us that Bhakti Yoga is a very similar practice in all the denominations of Hinduism. It's just that Vaishnavism stops there. It doesn't have a Raja Yoga or a Jnana Yoga. It stops with a really intense dualistic love. Both denominations emphasize the soul's coming ever closer to God, ultimately instilling an intense love of God. Then we get to common practices, Shravana, listening to the stories of God, or studying scripture in our case. Kirtana, singing devotional hymns and songs. I'm sure that's what's going on in our temple right now. Smarana, remembering the presence and name of the divine. This includes mantra repetition. So we would call that japa. Parasevana, service to the holy feet, which includes serving humanity. And archana, worship, both in the temple as well as attending or conducting worship in one's home shrine. Vandana, prostrating to the deity. We had some of that down out on Samarga the other day by some of our pilgrims. Atma Nivedana, complete self-surrender. And getting toward a summary here, Bhakti Yoga seeks to develop qualities that make communion possible, such as love, selflessness, and purity, leading to self-effacement and total surrender to God. It is in this idea of the need for total surrender, prapatti, that the members of all sects merge in oneness, which I was just saying. We know that we have attained prapatti when we effortlessly know that everything that happens to us is due to the grace of God and not our own actions. There is no sense of fear in this mode of worship. This is all excerpted from a publisher's desk, which starts out talking about some people fear God and how we don't want to do that. In a letter he wrote to a young man, our Paramaguru Yogaswami explained the unity perspective to be held not only toward God, but toward everything, which is the basis of Hindu worship. I am with you, and you are with me. There is no distance between us. I am you. You are I. What is there to fear? Look, I exist as you. Then what must you do? You must love. Whom? Everyone. To speak more clearly, your very nature is love. Not only you, but all are pervaded by love. But there is no all, for you alone exist. All are you. So that's where Saivism keeps going and Vaishnavism stops. As I said, Vaishnavism stops at lover beloved being two. This is taking it one step further. There's only one. Everything is one. You alone exist. In our terminology, no, that was a class here. I won't talk about what I talked about here at a class. Second topic, and how are we doing on time? Pretty good. Obedience, which is the 37th character quality from our workbook. And how would you define obedience? Oh, there's a subtlety in the definition I'll point out when I read it. Workbook gives this definition. Obedience means quickly, cheerfully, and accurately carrying out instructions. I cultivate it by controlling my tendency to resist directions or do things differently than asked. The opposite is resistance. In other words, there's a human trait. When somebody proposes doing something one way, you always make a counter-proposal. You're never willing to flow along with the original idea. So that's called resistance. And it's kind of counterproductive to getting things done in an efficient way. So the idea is, on small things, it's good to flow along with the idea unless it's going to cause a major disaster. Where you want to resist is save your resistance for big things, like you're going to move from one house to another and you don't agree. Husband and wife don't agree on what to do. That's okay on the big things, but on the small things it's good not to resist and not express that human tendency. And Gurudeva's quotes, discipline and obedience. Nothing was ever accomplished on this earth without these two qualities. Be self-disciplined. Cultivate self-control. Obey your gurus, obey your mothers, obey your fathers, obey your elders, obey your Saivite teachers. And next quote, obey your guru, obey your guru. Shiva's devotees obey their Satguru, carrying out his directions, expressed or implied, with intelligent cooperation, without delay. In other words, it's not this fairy tale obedience. If the guru says jump off a cliff, you jump off a cliff. You know, that's a fairy tale. We're trying for intelligent cooperation, which means if it's really important to understand something you don't understand, you ask questions and get a better understanding of what the guru wants you to do before you just run off and do it without really understanding it. Scriptures say a guru must be carefully chosen, and when one is found, to follow him with all your heart, to obey and fulfill his every instruction, better than he would have expected you to, and most importantly, even better than you would have expected of yourself. Comparing the actions of one who is obedient to one who is resistant. Here it is. For situation when your father gives instructions for a minor task, you, obedience, are happy to fulfill it exactly as he explained. Resistance, feel a need to discuss your own ideas on how to approach it. Second situation, when your dance teacher gives you a long series of exercises, you, obedience, accept each one, execute it well, and report back to her. Resistance, find the work tedious and use your time of dance for self-expression. And the third situation, when the school rules change and students are asked to dress uniformly, you acquiesce to the change even though you would prefer different choices, which is obedience. Resistance, ignore the dress code and rebelliously continue to wear your preferred clothing. And reflection. Take a moment to identify a few ways in which you can improve in obedience. And I misspelled it there, or just on my slide. And as I'm saying, it's really for adults, it's this resistance issue, wanting to do something a different way than somebody else proposed initially. Making sure you're not exercising that instinctive quality of resistance in certain situations. And that's what our assignment is for 2 weeks. Watch those moments when you are given a project or instruction and work to fulfill it without undue resistance or questioning. Oh, thank you very much. Deity is almost dressed. Om.